Imagine, you wake in the middle of the night because of a very faint sound, a cough, not the roar of a lion, not footsteps outside the shelter, not the wind, just someone coughing. You turn around. The person lying beside the fire is trembling. Their skin is hot. Their breathing is rapid. Yesterday afternoon, they were still walking around, still talking, still eating with everyone else. But the next morning, they cannot stand. You place your hand on their forehead. Unusually hot. You know something is wrong, but you do not know why. No one in the group has ever seen a virus. No one knows what a bacterium is. No one understands the immune system. There is no microscope, no laboratory, no antibiotics, no vaccine, no thermometer, no blood test, no doctor in the room next door. There is only a body growing weaker and a group of people trying to understand what is happening. Then, 2 days later, someone else begins to cough. Then, a child. Now the problem has changed. This is no longer one sick person. Something is moving. But how is it moving? Through the air, through water, through food, through hands, through insects? Or is this a curse, a spirit, a punishment? Has something invisible entered the settlement you do not know? And that may be the most frightening part. A predator can be seen. If a big cat approaches, you can run, throw stones, keep the fire burning, gather the group. But disease, you can run from a lion. You cannot run from something that is already inside your body. So how did our ancestors survive? This seems like a question with a simple answer. They were lucky, but that is not enough. If survival depended only on luck, a species living in an environment filled with wounds, parasites, contaminated food, and infectious disease would have struggled to spread across the planet the way humans did. Our ancestors did not have modern medicine, but they were not completely helpless. They had a system of defense that existed long before hospitals, a system built from many layers: the immune system, behavior, plants, fire, food processing, social care, knowledge, and sometimes something incredibly simple: keeping your distance from someone who was sick. But before we ask how ancient humans treated disease, we have to ask a more important question. Was disease in prehistory really the same as disease today? The answer is not entirely. A pathogen also needs enough people to survive. Imagine that you are a virus. You cannot survive indefinitely outside a host under every condition. You need a body. You enter. You replicate. Then you have to find another body. If the next host is right beside you, perfect. But what if there are only 30 people in the group, and the next group is dozens of kilometers away? You have a problem. A rapidly spreading infectious disease can sweep through a small population and then run out of susceptible people to infect. The transmission chain ends. This is why population density changed the history of disease. For most of prehistory, many human communities lived in relatively small groups with varying levels of mobility. That does not mean they were perfectly healthy. Not at all. Parasites, wound infections, dental disease, gastrointestinal illness, zoonotic infections, chronic infections, and many other problems certainly existed. But some epidemic diseases require populations that are large and connected enough to sustain continuous transmission. When agriculture expanded, everything changed. Settlements became larger. Population density increased. People remained in the same place for longer periods. Waste accumulated. Water contamination became a greater problem. Livestock lived close to humans. Trade routes connected different populations. A pathogen now had the one thing it always needed: more hosts. Imagine a fire. In a small group, the fire burns through its fuel and goes out. In a city, there is always more wood. Disease can sometimes operate according to a similar logic. Not every disease, not every pathogen, but for infections that require large transmission chains, cities eventually became an entirely new environment. One of civilization's greatest achievements had unintentionally created a paradise for certain microbes. But agriculture created another encounter as well. Humans and animals began living closer together than ever before. Cattle, pigs, goats, sheep, poultry, dogs had already been living alongside humans. Rodents were attracted to food stores. Insects were attracted to waste and standing water. A new ecological world emerged. Humans, animals, parasites, pathogens, all sharing the same space. Scientists believe that many infectious diseases throughout human history are connected to complex zoonotic processes in which pathogens can cross the boundaries between species, although the specific origins of each disease must be studied individually, and we cannot simply say that every epidemic came from livestock. But ancient people knew none of this. They could only see the pattern. This person became sick, then another, a family, then a neighborhood. And humans are exceptionally good at one thing, finding patterns even when we do not understand the mechanism. That may have been the first step toward medicine. Don't go near that person. Let us return to the settlement. One person becomes sick. The next day, the person sleeping beside them becomes sick too. Another person farther away does not. It happens once, not enough to draw a conclusion, but then it happens again and again. Across generations, communities could accumulate observations, not the pathogen is being transmitted through respiratory droplets, but simply being close to a sick person may be dangerous. This is a crucial distinction between an explanation and useful behavior. You can explain disease incorrectly and still perform a behavior that reduces risk. A community might believe that illness is connected to spiritual pollution, and because of that belief, they separate the sick person from everyone else. The explanation may not fit modern microbiology, but the behavior can still sometimes have a protective effect. The same may be true of corpses. Waste, contaminated areas, spoiled food. Some taboos may sound entirely symbolic, but they can sometimes affect exposure as well. We have to be extremely careful here. We cannot look at any ancient ritual and declare that was actually public health. Rituals have many meanings. Religion is not simply medicine in disguise, and archaeological evidence often does not allow us to know exactly why a particular behavior was practiced. But anthropologists propose that cultural practices can sometimes produce health consequences regardless of how the people practicing them understood the underlying mechanism. What matters is that selection does not require a correct theory. If a behavior reduces mortality, the group or tradition that preserves that behavior may gain an advantage. And over time, the rule survives. Don't drink the water there. Don't eat an animal that looks like this. Don't sleep beside someone who has a fever. Don't touch that. A child asks why an adult may answer with a story, a spirit, an ancestor, a taboo. But beneath that story, there may sometimes be generations of trial and error. Culture can preserve a solution, even when the explanation changes. But if avoidance fails, and you have already become sick, now you need another layer of defense. Fortunately, you have carried it inside your body since birth. Most of the time, our ancestors became sick. Their bodies had to fight for themselves. You develop a fever. You lie down. No antibiotics, no antivirals, no pharmacy. So what is saving you? You. Or more precisely, your immune system. Your skin is a barrier. Mucus traps particles. Stomach acid creates a hostile environment for many organisms. Innate immune responses react quickly to threats. The adaptive immune system can generate more specific responses and memory against certain pathogens. All of this exists without you needing to understand it. A Paleolithic person did not know what an antibody was, but antibodies still worked. They did not know white blood cells existed. White blood cells still did their job. They did not know fever was part of a physiological response. The body could still raise its temperature. This is something we often overlook when we ask, how did humans survive before medicine? The first answer is, because most medicine has never existed outside the body. Modern medicine supports, regulates, strengthens, or intervenes when natural systems are not enough. But the foundation of survival is still biology. If our ancestors suffered a mild infection, they might recover. If they suffered a severe infection, they might die. There was no miracle. Child mortality in the past was often extremely high compared with many modern societies. Wounds could become dangerous. Childbirth could lead to complications. A dental infection could become a serious problem. An illness that can be treated easily today could once have changed the fate of an entire family. But survival was not completely random. Natural selection constantly interacted with pathogens. A pathogen places pressure on a population. Some genetic variants affect susceptibility or resistance. Survivors reproduce. Across many generations, the frequency of those variants can change. This is an evolutionary arms race. Pathogens evolve, hosts evolve. Pathogens find ways to exploit us. Immune systems find ways to stop them. Neither side wins forever. And sometimes, an adaptation that protects against one disease creates a trade-off somewhere else. Evolution does not design perfect bodies. It only produces something effective enough in a particular environment for reproduction to continue. But biology was not the only thing helping the sick. Humans possessed something else that was profoundly unusual. When you cannot find food, someone else can find it for you. Why could an injured person survive for many more years? Imagine that you break your leg. In the world of many wild animals, that could be a death sentence. You cannot run. You cannot hunt. You cannot easily escape a predator. You cannot keep up with the group. But humans have a remarkable ability. Someone else can bring you food, bring you water, keep the fire burning, protect you, help you move, care for your wound, and wait. Archaeological evidence from many hominin remains shows that some individuals survived for considerable periods after serious injuries or severe functional impairment. Any attempt to infer the precise degree of care must always be made cautiously. A healed injury does not automatically prove the existence of hospital care in the modern sense. But some cases suggest that long-term survival may be difficult to explain if there was absolutely no social support. And this changes the entire equation of disease. A sick chimpanzee must depend heavily on itself. Humans can externalize part of survival. If you cannot find calories, someone else brings you calories. If you cannot protect yourself, the group protects you. If you cannot remember which plant was used, someone else remembers. Medicine then did not begin with a pill. It may have begun with a simple act, a healthy person deciding not to abandon the weak. Think about the cost. An injured person still eats, but does not hunt. The person caring for them also loses time. From the perspective of short-term calories, it seems expensive. But humans do not live only in the present. The injured person today may be an excellent hunter next month. A grandmother who can no longer run quickly may still preserve knowledge. An older person may know where to find water. An injured toolmaker may still teach skills. A surviving parent continues caring for children. Social care preserves the group's human capital. But perhaps there is an even deeper reason. Attachment, empathy, kinship, friendship. Humans do not need to calculate evolutionary fitness before giving water to someone with a fever. We care because we care about one another. And paradoxically, that emotion may have become one of the most powerful survival technologies our species ever developed. But the caregiver still has to do one thing. They have to decide what to do with the sick body. And there, the world of plants enters the story. But how do you know which plants can help and which ones can kill you? You are walking through a landscape containing thousands of different kinds of plants. Some are edible, some are useless, some cause stomach pain, some are poisonous. Some contain compounds that we now know can have pharmacological effects, but you have no textbook. So where does that knowledge begin? Perhaps with observation. Someone chews a certain kind of leaf. The pain decreases. Or it does not. A plant is placed on a wound. It works. Or it causes irritation. A piece of bark is boiled. A root is crushed. A resin is applied. Most experiments may do nothing at all. Some are dangerous. But across thousands of generations, knowledge can accumulate. Scientists have identified bioactive compounds in many plants that have been used by traditional communities. But this does not mean that every traditional remedy is effective. Some may have genuine pharmacological effects. Some may have limited effects. Some may work through placebo effects or ritual context. Some are ineffective. Some may even be dangerous. We should not romanticize prehistoric medicine. Ancient people did not possess some perfect secret pharmacy that modern science has forgotten. They lived in a world of trial and error, and sometimes error meant death. But cumulative culture changed the game. If one person had to test 1,000 plants by themselves, they might die before learning very much. If a community passed knowledge across generations, each person would not have to start from zero. Use this plant for this problem. Don't use too much. This part of the plant is different from that part. Harvest it during this season. Prepare it this way. Knowledge became incredibly specific, and this is where language may have played an enormous role. A chimpanzee can observe, humans can explain. Not just, do what I do, but take this root, not that root. Boil it. Wait. Use only a little. Language allowed medical knowledge to become more detailed and to survive longer than the person who discovered it. But plants were not the most powerful technology humans discovered. Another technology sat at the center of the camp every night. It glowed, it produced smoke, it transformed food, and it may have unintentionally reduced certain risks of disease. Fire. Cooking food also changes the microbial world. A piece of raw meat lies in front of you. You place it over the fire. Heat changes the proteins. The texture changes. The smell changes. The taste changes. But something else happens too. Enough heat can kill many pathogens and parasites present in food. Ancient people did not need to know that. They only needed to recognize that cooked food had different properties. Of course, cooking does not automatically make all food safe. Contamination can occur after cooking. Some toxins do not simply disappear. Water can still carry pathogens. But controlled fire created a layer of protection that most animals do not have. And it also helped humans process certain plant foods that were difficult to digest or contained compounds requiring processing. Fire transformed food. But fire also transformed behavior. A hearth brought people together. Food was processed in one place. Water could be heated once container technology made it possible. Tools could be prepared. Smoke could affect insects. A camp with fire was not a sterile environment, far from it, but it was an environment humans had modified. This is a pattern repeated throughout our evolution. Humans did not wait for their bodies to evolve solutions to every threat. We changed the environment around our bodies. Cold fire, food difficult to digest, cooking, predators, weapons, and group defense. Disease risk. Certain behavioral practices may reduce exposure. We created a cultural immune system outside our biological immune system. But fire also had its limits. It could help with food. It could not cure an infection that had already spread deep inside the body. And when it came to wounds, even a small cut could become terrifying. Because before antibiotics, no wound was ever completely small. You are making a stone tool. Your hand slips. A sharp stone edge cuts through your skin. A small wound appears. Today, you might wash it, disinfect it, bandage it, monitor it, if the infection becomes serious, to medical care. But in deep prehistory, a wound opened a door. Soil, animal tissue, dirty water, hands, foreign material. All of them could come into contact with the wound, and if an infection developed, there was no antibiotic prescription waiting for you. So what did ancient people do? We cannot precisely reconstruct the first aid protocol of any particular Paleolithic group. Soft materials rarely survive archaeologically, but basic wound care could emerge through observation, stopping the wound from continuing to bleed, removing debris, covering it, resting, using certain plants or materials, and most importantly, giving the body time to heal. Healing itself is a biological marvel. Blood coagulates, inflammatory responses begin, cells rebuild tissue, the skin closes. You do not need medicine for wound healing to happen. Medicine helps make that process safer and treats complications. But our ancestors depended heavily on the body's own ability to repair itself. Skeletal remains sometimes show fractures that healed. A bone breaks and then fuses back together. That means the person survived long enough for healing to occur. Behind every healed fracture is a story we can no longer hear. Perhaps there was pain, weeks of limited mobility, other people bringing food, someone helping them remain with the group when it moved. No heroic battle, no grand invention, just time and care. But infection did not always come from a wound. Sometimes it came from something the entire community needed every single day. Water. And when humans began living in larger settlements, clean water became one of the most difficult survival problems civilization had ever created. A clear stream, you can see the stones beneath the surface. There is no strange smell. You drink. A few days later, you become sick. This is what makes microbial disease so frightening. Danger does not necessarily look dangerous. A rotting carcass smells. A poisonous snake can be seen. But contaminated water can look completely normal. In a small, mobile group, people can move away from places where waste accumulates. In a settlement, waste and water sources can grow increasingly close together. The larger the population, the harder the problem becomes. Human waste contains pathogens. Animal waste does too. Rain can carry contamination into water. Wells can be affected. Storage vessels can become contaminated. And a sick person can contribute to further contamination. A feedback loop emerges. Disease contamination, more disease. No one needs to understand microbiology. The settlement only needs to be poorly designed, and the pathogen will take advantage of it. Over time, many societies developed infrastructure and customs related to water management, drainage wells, and waste. Not all of these were created to fight germs in the modern sense, but they changed disease ecology. This is an important lesson. Medicine does not begin only when a sick person lies down. Public health begins before the sick person appears. Where is the water? Where does the waste go? How is food stored? Where do animals live? How many people sleep in the same space? Decisions that may seem unrelated to medicine can determine the health of an entire population. But ancient people still had to explain what they were seeing. A disease has no face. And humans are deeply uncomfortable with things that seem to have no cause. So, we create causes, and that is where medicine encounters something that has accompanied humanity from deep within our history. Ritual. If you don't know pathogens exist, how do you explain a fever? A child lies sick. The family sits around them. A healer approaches. They may use a plant, touch the body, speak special words, perform a ritual, perhaps call upon an ancestor, a spirit, an invisible force for us. Medicine and religion are often placed into two separate boxes. But in many societies of the past, that boundary may not have existed in the modern sense. A healer could simultaneously possess practical botanical knowledge, social authority, ritual knowledge, and a cosmological explanation for illness. From the perspective of modern science, one part of the treatment might have a physiological effect. Another part might not. But for the sick person, they were all part of the same process. This should not simply be dismissed as ignorance. Ritual can do things that modern medicine sometimes struggles to measure with a single question. It brings a community together, creates a sense of being cared for, reduces uncertainty, gives suffering meaning, creates a script for caregivers, and may influence the perception of pain, stress, and expectation. That does not mean ritual can cure a bacterial infection. It does not replace antibiotics. But disease is not only biological damage, it is also a psychological experience. Humans want to know, why me? What is happening? Will I survive? Will the others abandon me? Ritual answers some of those questions, even when it cannot eliminate the pathogen. And perhaps that is why human medicine has always had two sides. One side treats the body, the other treats the experience of a frightened human being. But ultimately, no matter how much plants, ritual, or social care could help, some diseases were simply too powerful. Some epidemics swept through populations and left enormous numbers of people dead. So why was humanity not wiped out? Because every epidemic did something terrible, but it also created another group, the survivors. Every epidemic left behind more than graves. Imagine a settlement after an outbreak. It is quieter. Smoke no longer rises from some houses. Some families have lost their children. People who once worked in the fields are no longer there. A healer has died. An elder who once carried enormous amounts of knowledge is gone too. Disease does not only take bodies, it can take information. But amid all that loss, some people still rise. Someone who spent days burning with fever recovers. A child survives. Someone who cared for many sick people never becomes seriously ill. Why? Perhaps they were less exposed. Perhaps the dose was lower. Perhaps their age or health status was different. Perhaps previous exposure created immune protection against certain infections. Perhaps genetics played a role. Perhaps it was simply probability. In disease ecology, survival rarely has a single explanation. But at the population level, epidemics can become a powerful force of selection. If a genetic variant increases the likelihood of survival or reproduction within a particular disease environment, that variant can become more common across generations. Scientists have found evidence that infectious diseases have exerted significant selection pressures on the human genome. In particular, genes related to immune function often reveal a history of intense evolutionary conflict. This has profound implications. An epidemic does not simply happen to a population. Given enough time, it can help change that population. Pathogens evolve to exploit hosts. Host populations evolve under pressure from pathogens, and both sides become locked in a race with no finish line. But natural selection does not create perfection. A variant that helps protect against one infection in one context may come with trade-offs in another. If an immune system responds too weakly, the pathogen wins. If it responds too strongly, the inflammation itself can cause damage. The body must constantly balance attack and restraint. It is a battle taking place inside us every day, and most of the time we never even notice it. But genes transmit information very slowly. A genetic adaptation may require many generations. Humans have a faster system. If an outbreak happens today, and one person discovers a behavior that helps reduce risk, tomorrow the entire group can imitate it. That is the advantage of culture. Genes are transmitted through reproduction. Knowledge is transmitted through communication. And when disease appears for the second time, the population does not necessarily have to start from zero. A community can become immune through culture before understanding biological immunity. Years pass. The children who survived the outbreak have grown up. A new generation is born. They have never seen that disease. To them, the story sounds almost like a myth. Back then, many people developed fevers. Don't use that water source when the season changes. If someone shows these signs, don't let everyone sleep beside them. Don't eat that after it has been sitting out for too long. Take the sick person to this place. Perhaps some of these rules genuinely help. Some are neutral, some are wrong, some are entirely symbolic. But all of them can be passed down in the same form, tradition. This is what makes cultural evolution both powerful and dangerous. Useful knowledge can survive, but so can misinformation. If two behaviors are passed down together, one with a protective effect and one without, the people practicing them do not necessarily know which one is producing the result. So prehistoric medicine was almost certainly a mixture. Observation, useful remedies, ineffective remedies, ritual, taboo, experience, error, and sometimes pure chance. But cumulative culture has one advantage: it can be corrected. One person tries a different method. One group learns from another. Trade does not only move food, it moves information. Migration does not only move genes, it moves techniques. Marriage between communities can also carry knowledge. A plant remedy from one valley can reach another valley. A method of caring for a wound can spread. A warning about contaminated water can become a rule. No journal required. No university required. No writing required. Human networks themselves were information networks. And when writing finally appeared, something new happened. Medical knowledge no longer depended entirely on a living memory. It could survive on physical material. A healer dies, but some of the information can remain. From there, medicine enters a new stage. But thousands of years before writing, an archive already existed. Elders, parents, healers, storytellers, and the community itself, perhaps humanity's first medical library, was made of the people who remembered who had lived and who had died. You cannot fight an infection with a body that has run out of energy. Let us return to the person with the fever from the beginning of the story. They are not hunting, not gathering. They cannot go and fetch water. But their body is still consuming energy. The immune response requires resources. Tissue repair requires protein and micronutrients. Fever can increase metabolic demands, and the sick person may eat less at exactly the moment their body is under stress. This is where social care becomes important once again. A bowl of food, water, warmth, rest. Nothing dramatic, not a miracle cure. But supportive care is an extremely important part of survival. Today, we are accustomed to thinking of medicine as something that is added to the body, a pill, an injection, surgery. But much of care is about creating the conditions that allow physiology to function. Hydration, nutrition, temperature management, rest, protection, monitoring. Ancient people did not have modern clinical protocols, but through observation they could perform some basic forms of care. A person with a fever needs water. An injured person needs reduced activity. A weak child needs to be kept warm. Someone who cannot find food for themselves needs to be fed. This seems obvious to us, but from an evolutionary perspective, it is remarkable. You are transferring calories from a healthy individual to an individual who is currently contributing little to food acquisition. Once again, the group is betting on future recovery. If that person recovers, the investment returns to the community. But even if they do not, humans may still provide care. That shows us that our survival cannot be explained by cold calculation alone. Compassion can have evolutionary consequences, but to the person expressing it, it can still simply be compassion. A mother does not need to understand inclusive fitness to care for her child. A friend does not need to understand evolutionary theory to bring water to someone who is injured. And perhaps this is where medicine truly begins. Not when humans discovered the first medicinal plant, but when one person saw another person's suffering and decided, I will try to help. Because there was no single layer of defense, now we can return to the original question. How did ancient humans survive disease without medicine? The answer is, they did not live without medicine in the broadest sense. They lived without modern medicine. Those are two very different things. They had biological defenses, immune systems shaped by hundreds of millions of years of vertebrate evolution. They had behavior, avoidance, food processing, fire, mobility, and, perhaps in some cases, the separation of sick individuals. They had knowledge of plants. Although the effectiveness of individual remedies varied enormously, they had social care, food, water, warmth, protection. They had culture. Knowledge did not die with the first person who discovered it. They had networks. Techniques and warnings could move between groups. And finally, they had evolution. Disease kills, but survivors produced the next generation. No defense was perfect. The immune system could fail. A plant remedy could be useless. A ritual might not change the biological course of an infection. A caregiver could become infected. An outbreak could kill most of a community. But survival does not require everyone to live. This is the brutal part of evolutionary history. It only requires enough people to survive, enough to have children, enough to preserve knowledge, enough to rebuild the group, enough to continue. That is why human history contains a paradox. We are incredibly vulnerable. No armor, no thick fur, no claws, no extraordinary regenerative ability. But we can turn the weakness of one individual into a problem for the entire group. You are sick, someone else brings food. You are injured, someone else helps. You do not know which plant to use, an elder does. You have never seen an epidemic before, a story can warn you. A single human body is remarkably fragile, but many human bodies, connected through care and information, become far more difficult to wipe out. And this may be the deepest secret of human medicine. We turned survival from an individual task into a collective one. Let us return to that first night. The person beside the fire is burning with fever. You still know nothing about viruses, nothing about bacteria, nothing about germ theory. You cannot see the enemy. But you can do a few things. You bring water. You keep the person warm. You let them rest. Someone else finds food. An elder prepares a plant that the community commonly uses. Perhaps the plant helps, perhaps it does not. You observe, you wait. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Then one morning, the sick person opens their eyes. The fever has gone down. They drink, then they sit up. A few days later, they walk outside. No one knows what the antibodies just did. No one knows about immune memory. No one knows exactly why this person survived, while someone else once died with similar symptoms. But the community remembers. They remember what they did. They tell the story. A child watches. Years later, that child becomes an adult. Someone else becomes sick. And the cycle begins again. That is how knowledge grew before science. Not through laboratories, but through generations, observation, failure, memory, story, and care. Modern medicine has transformed our survival in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. Antibiotics, vaccines, anesthesia, sterile surgery, diagnostic imaging, intensive care. Things that once killed millions of people can now, in many cases, be prevented or treated. But beneath all that technology, there is still one very ancient behavior. One person lies down, another person steps forward, and asks, "What can I do to help?" Perhaps medicine began at that very moment. Imagine a person thousands of years ago putting a certain plant into their mouth, not because they are hungry, not to treat a wound, not to reduce a fever. A little while later, the world begins to change. Colors look different, sounds become strange, the sense of time distorts. Perhaps they see something that is not there. Perhaps they feel as though they are speaking with their ancestors, spirits, gods, or another world. Humans have known for a very long time that certain plants can alter consciousness. But why would we deliberately seek out such states? Why would an animal that must remain constantly alert for predators intentionally alter its own perception? That is the next story. Why did ancient humans deliberately alter their minds? Because there came a point in history when humans no longer used plants only to keep the body alive. We began using them to explore what was happening inside the mind.